Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. The Napoleon attack for white is not good, and the reverse Napoleon attack for black is a straight up mistake. I like to call this the Napoleon-ish Queen attack, and I kind of like to imagine Napoleon dressed in drag. Now, my opponent used this interesting opening against me in this game. Let's go take a look. So I started with the white pieces, so as usual, the Vienna game, e4, e5, knight c3, and then my opponent played the queen f6, so the reverse Napoleon attack, or the Napoleon-ish Queen, and this is a straight up mistake. It's a bad move, Stockfish doesn't like it, and fundamentally the reason for that is that I have now knight to d5, which attacks the queen, but also attacks the c7 square, which of course comes with a fork of the king and rook. Now, I don't have to play that right away, so I decide to develop our other knight. They play d6, and then I lose patience, and I do play the knight move. And my opponent plays the principled queen back to d8. But what this does mean is that a queen moved twice back to the same spot. It's like I had 2 extra turns. Now, when you have the opportunity to take the full center with pawns, you probably should do so, and that's what I did. They develop their knight. I take their pawn, they take my pawn, and now queen to the center, defending my pawn and also attacking their knight. They bring the bishop out to defend their knight, and one of the things is, once the light square bishop is out, it potentially weakens some of the light squares on the queen side, and we will see that in the next few moves. I bring now my bishop to d3, putting a second attacker on that knight, also preparing for short castles, and my opponent rightly develops their knight, counter-attacking my queen. And now I need to do something about this attack on the queen. Stockfish thinks that queen to c4 is the best move. I didn't see that in the game, and so eventually I opted to play bishop to b5, which pins the knight to the king. Now, I knew that this was probably a suboptimal move because I moved the bishop twice, or that's almost never going to be good. Stockfish calls this a blunder, but it's only actually a blunder if the opponent finds the apparent most optimal move, which is the rather unintuitive, completely not obvious, I would say, queen to d7. Now, the reason why that's not obvious is, yes, it sort of unpins the knight, but if the knight takes my queen, well, I take the queen back with check, and then afterwards I win the knight. So yeah, that's not an obvious move, but apparently that was the most optimal move. Everything else is still good for me. The opponent didn't see that. It's quite a baffling move, so asks a much more human question: what am I going to do with my bishop? Of course, I was going to take out the attacker against my queen. Captures, they capture back. That pawn is now attacking my knight, but now I've got queen to a4, pinning the pawn on c6 to the king, so that can no longer take my knight, still keeping pressure on that knight. And this is, as I said, these light square diagonals on the queen side being a little bit weak now that the bishop had moved out. And here I thought that that comes with check, so if they move the bishop back right away, then I end up capturing their knight. So what did my opponent do? So they opted to just develop their dark square bishop, getting ready to castle, and here I take the pawn. Now they bring their bishop back. However, in this position, it is very, very good for me. In fact, it's almost +9. Now, the reason for that is this powerful knight on d5. Now, there's a number of ways of doing it. I think the way that Stockfish recommends is just to straight up queen takes rook. That queen, of course, is now pinned to the king. They can take back, but now rook to captures a pawn on c7, absolute fork, king and queen. It wins the queen. Now, I opted not to play it that way. I decided to play the knight move first. Knight captures the pawn on c7 with check, forcing the king to move unless they want to trade their queen for the knight. Of course, they move their king, and now I take basically just a slightly slightly different move order. They decided not to take my queen, which was a mistake because there's nothing stopping me from taking their queen. They take back. Now knight jumps back to d5, capturing another pawn. If we look at that exchange, for my queen, I won their queen, their rook, and 2 pawns. Absolute bargain, and I am completely winning now, moving towards plus 9.5, plus 10. Very, very good. At this point, really the most important thing for me is just not to stuff up. They attack my knight, pull the knight back to e3. They develop their bishop with check, and here I probably should have blocked potentially with one of these pieces. Instead, I decided to block with the pawn, which was probably suboptimal because captures, capture back, and now they've got the fork of the king and rook. I sort of saw that a little bit later. I actually wondered whether or not I made a mistake. That's fine. Developed my piece. Yep, they took the rook. Short castles. And it was in this position, when I was sort of analysing the move, that I realised that quite just completely on luck, because I didn't plan this, this bishop is actually trapped in this position. So if they take that pawn, of course, I capture back. If they go to this square, it gets captured. If it goes to this square, it gets captured. But what if it comes here? Well, now I've got rook to b1 attacking the bishop, and if the bishop moves anywhere, if it goes here, of course, the other squares, it gets captured. But if it comes here, we've got this skewer of the king against the rook. King has to move out of the way, and I win the rook. So quite a accidentally brilliant position for me. The opponent actually saw that because they decided to abandon their bishop. They sort of develop a piece. I take the bishop. They now move the king to sort of potentially allow for the rook to develop. However, unfortunately for them, that is a fork. And of course, I'm happy to trade pieces when I'm so many pieces up. Now it's three pieces versus 2. Relatively easy to evade. Now, in this position, I ask, let's trade rooks. They say no. Looks like a fork, but I've got a check. And get to take that pawn, defending my bishop. They can take that pawn, which comes with check, move the king out of the way. They try to attack that knight, however, miss the fact that the king and rook are on the same diagonal. And with that fork, my opponent opted to resign. What a great game. GG. The big takeaway from this game is to not play the Napoleon-ish Queen. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.